Hello book lovers and welcome back or welcome to Nakat's Bookish Cafe. Today I'm here to give you 6 recommendations for sci-fi romances you should consider checking out. Alright guys, I am here in my Take Me to Your Reader shirt, which I absolutely love, and of course my little cows being abducted by alien earrings to talk about some sci-fi romances that I have read. Honestly, probably in the last couple of years. There's a series or two on here that I haven't read for a few years, and so my details on them are a little fuzzy. All I remember is that I enjoyed them and thought more people should read these. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about those 6 books in this video. I will say all of them are male romances. So I figured June was a good time to talk about them since it's Pride Month. But if you have recommendations for any sci-fi romances, I would love if you left those down below. Don't have to be male romances. Any kind of romance, alien romances, human romances, whatever it is. I am trying to get a little bit more back into sci-fi because I kind of fell off the wagon with that a little bit. And I really think that romance is the way for me since I am a romance girly. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the first of the 6 books. Up first, we have The Fever King duology by Victoria Lee. First book being The Fever King, the second one being The Electric Heir. In this book, we are following 16-year-old Naum, which is apparently how you say his name. I looked it up because I was like, I have no idea how to say this, but Naum is apparently the way you say it. And he is living in what you can essentially call a post-apocalyptic America. There is this plague of sorts that is going around, and people are either dying from it, or if they survive it, they gain magical abilities. And unfortunately, his entire family, who were refugees, were killed except for him, who ended up gaining magical abilities. He's offered a place at the school where people are trained to use their magical abilities, and he takes this opportunity to kind of try to take the system down from the inside, because the current system is, as most systems, not very good to refugees, and he wants to help them, seeing he himself was one. He gets very close to someone who has a lot of political power and someone who may have some dark secrets of his own. On the other hand, he also gets close to this man's pupil, a young boy who does not seem to like the fact that Gnome is there. However, the two of them start working together to kind of break down the system that is currently in place, and while they do that, they start to form a romantic relationship between the two of them. I will say that this book definitely, from what I remember, has some triggers, including grooming and sexual child abuse within it, including things that happen to our character himself. He is definitely groomed throughout this story, so that can be very difficult for people to read. I just thought that the idea of a magical plague was a very interesting concept at the time. I think since then I have seen it a few times, but this was my first experience with it, and I really did quite enjoy that. I thought that Gnome and his partner's relationship and his relationship with those around him was very complex. He's definitely someone who found himself on his own and really wanted someone who cared about him, and at times that made it so that he did not really see that those he was letting into his life were actually hurting him, because he was just so desperate to have anyone in his life after losing his family so suddenly and brutally. He and his partner definitely have ups and downs in their relationship, and I felt that it was very realistic considering what they were going through and their different upbringings. The fact that they definitely had disagreements and fell apart and found ways to come back together, I thought was a relatively complex relationship to be seeing within a young adult story. The powers that our character gets from surviving the plague is called technopath, and from what I remember, that kind of allows him to do a lot with like technology, which makes him a very interesting spy because he is able to hack into a lot of systems. This is one of the stories that I read a bit longer ago, so my memory of it is a little bit vague, and sometimes I think that I would enjoy rereading it again just because it was such an interesting and complex story, and I just remember thinking it was rather mature for a young adult story. So if you're looking for something to kind of introduce you into sci-fi, I think young adult books are definitely the way to go. And this one having more advanced and complex topics and emotions and relationships within it, I would also make it a good transition book from YA to adult novels. Up next, we have a well-known one, and that is Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell. This is kind of a sci-fi mystery story in which we are following two young men who are in an arranged marriage. After Kaim's cousin dies in a spacecraft crash, his husband Janin needs to be remarried to Kaim so that the relationship between their two planets that marriage had provided will continue. It's very clear that Janin has very low self-esteem and potentially was being abused by his partner and is struggling to be with a partner that is very different. Kaim, on the other hand, was never really planning on being in such an important relationship and having such an important role to play. He was always considered kind of the screw up of the family. And after they find some evidence that Janin's husband may have actually been murdered and that the crash was not an accident, the two of them decide to start investigating this. I would consider this a relatively slow burn. They definitely take some time to really grow on each other, especially Janin having come from an abusive relationship. It really took him a while to trust Kaim and to kind of open up to him and to kind of show his true colors so that Kaim could really get to know who he was and fall in love with that person. So I did enjoy the slow burn of that romance. I thought that the politics were rather intriguing throughout this story. We were very much dealing with micro politics, but also very aware of how those would impact macro politics because the empire that Kaim is part of overrules a single solar system and a rather small solar system, and there are definitely some bigger, stronger, more dangerous powers out there that are watching what is happening. So it definitely had a lot of stakes in this story. The pressures were high. Things got relatively intense towards the end of the story for sure. This is definitely a book that I would like to reread because I have forgotten most of it, but I remember enjoying it, and I do want to read the companion novel. It's not a continuation, it's just a companion novel, but at the same time, I would really like to go ahead and reread this and just get a better idea of the politics and some of the big players in the universe before I jump into that second book, just in case it does help me with it. And I really did enjoy the relationship between these two characters. They were really well balanced. I remember both of them had very different strengths. Janin is incredibly intelligent. He is someone who can collect and analyze data at a very impressive rate. And Kaim, on the other hand, who considered himself relatively worthless, was someone who was really good at networking and working with people and opening doors for them, which helped a lot in their investigation. His ability to gain trust with other people who were reluctant to help really helped with their investigation in the end, and he started to see his value within this kingdom as Janin kind of opened his eyes to exactly how much he was doing. So both of them were really starting to show each other what they are worth, and just watching them kind of grow in their self-confidence and in their love for each other was an excellent time. So highly recommend this story for sure, but of course some trigger warnings for that abusive relationship that one of our characters previously went through and the struggles that one faces when they are recovering from a relationship like that. Up next, we have The Darkness Outside Us by Elliot Schreffer, and this I believe is also a young adult book. Or is it adult? I can't even remember. I want to say it's leaning more young adult. And I believe there is a second book coming out, if it hasn't already, but it might be coming out a little later this year, which I will definitely be checking out. In this book, we are following Ambrose and Kodiak. And Ambrose wakes up on a ship, which he is fully expecting. He is on a mission to rescue his sister, who had been on a mission to find a planet that humans could inhabit. However, she had some difficulties with her spaceship, and so he has set off to rescue her. To his surprise, it seems that his ship is connected to another ship in which Kodiak resides. And Kodiak is actually from another country, one that Ambrose would consider somewhat like an enemy, but it seems that because humanity's survival depends on finding this planet, they have kind of band together to have these two work together to rescue his sister, which Ambrose was not aware of apparently when he first got onto the spaceship. There's definitely a very tense relationship between the two of them, and they are a bit reluctant to work together. However, when some weird things start happening to their spaceship, they find that they have no choice but to rely on each other to survive and hopefully find humanity's survival as well. This book, I would say for the first 50% was relatively interesting. I was having a decent time. I was like, oh, you know, this is probably going to be like 3.5, 4-star read. We're cruising in space, sexual tension is happening, the characters are interesting, and so is the plot. And then something happens at just before the 50% mark that completely changes the trajectory of the story and what kind of story this is. And obviously I'm not going to talk about that at all, so essentially I can't talk about the second half of the book at all, but just know that it was a very interesting and unexpected turn of events and just increased my interest in the story tenfold and added a lot of complexity to the relationships that our characters were building with each other. It also brought up some interesting topics and themes that I cannot name because it would be a spoiler, but I definitely think that this is a book worth checking out. I really enjoyed the audiobook, so I think that would be a good way to read this story, and trust me, that twist is going to throw you off, unless of course you're someone who's read it a bunch of times, and as someone who's new to sci-fi, I have not read it a bunch of times, so to me, I was like, oh my god, that's so cool that the author did that. But yes, highly recommend this book and definitely excited to check out the second one. Up next, I have a series that I have been reading on my channel for a few months now. I think I actually started it like in June or July last year, but my pace has definitely been picking up as I continue to enjoy this series more and more, and that is going to be the Monstrous series by Lily Mayne, the first book being Soul Eater. You can see the rest of the series here beside me. I've read the first 6 books, including the novella in the series, and this book, as well as the last 3, have been a 5-star read for me. The novella and book 2 were a 4.5, and book 3 was a 4-star. So none of these books have gotten under 4 stars. I have absolutely loved every single one of them. This is a post-apocalyptic story. There is a rift that forms between the human world and the world of these monsters. This rift had burst wide open 20 years prior to the start of the series, and the military's response was obviously to blow up everything that comes through that rift. And unfortunately, that caused a lot of destruction to the world as a whole, and most of the world is now wastelands. Most people either live in overcrowded cities where there's a lot of disease and poverty, and it is ruled over by the military. The only other option is to join the military or to become a raider who takes their chances out in the wastes, where the military will more than happily kill you if they come across you, or you may come across some dangerous monsters that roam those lands. Each of these books, we are following a different human, whether they're an ex-soldier or they are a raider who stumbles across a monster that they form a romantic relationship with. Each of these are male-male romances so far, and I have been having a wonderful time. I really enjoy the world building and the kind of macro plot that has been developing throughout the series. It deals a lot with military corruption and the mistreatment of monsters, as well as the mistreatment of humans by the military as they kind of seek control of the situation. I think that the romances in these stories are so sweet, so romantic, so sexy, so angsty. The smut that Lily Mayne writes is 10 out of 10. If you enjoy a good smut scene, then you definitely should be checking out these books. I have been enjoying the kind of found family vibes that I have been getting as we go further and further into the series, and as these characters kind of converge in a central area, as they kind of decide what they need to do to protect themselves and their partners from this looming threat. I really enjoy the author's writing. I think she really does a great job with character development, world building, unique descriptions of monsters, as well as the fighting scenes that she has within this series. So overall, a wonderful time. I think that there is really no fault in this series whatsoever. I'm having a great time, and if you have not picked it up yet, despite being on my channel for a while, definitely do so. These books should be on KU. I've just been buying them because I love them so much, and I know that I will probably reread them once I finish with the series. Another book that I read on KU, so hopefully it's still there, is Evolved by N.R. Walker, and this was a relatively short story from what I remember. I think I read it on my flight back from Germany, and I read the whole thing during the flight and was able to start another book on top of that. And this is a sci-fi story where we have a man named Lloyd, and he has OCD, and that has made it very difficult for him to form a relationship with another person because he has very certain ways of doing things, and that has tended to annoy other people, but he's really not willing to compromise, which he shouldn't have to. And in this society, there are these androids that you can program to kind of be exactly what you need them to be. And Lloyd has saved up to go ahead and purchase one of the most recent models of these, known as Sean. And so Sean is delivered to his house. He's looking forward to kind of creating a relationship with this android. A lot of people do kind of use them for sex, but Lloyd is actually hoping to form like a stronger bond with his android before they start having sex. However, he's very surprised when Sean starts to try to initiate romantic situations because he's not really supposed supposed to do that. And it turns out that Sean might be an upgraded version of what Lloyd initially thought he was going to get, one that isn't on the market yet. And as they form a closer bond with each other, they start to realize that Sean's company wants him back. I thought that this was just such a sweet story. Sean was very much someone who was enjoying the minor day-to-day activities that a lot of us just overlook, because he is very much someone who is new to the world. So if you enjoy kind of those characters that are kind of like an alien or a robot who's new to human life and are kind of just like amazed by everything that is going on, by just going outside and doing some basic shopping, and they're just having the time of their life, then Sean is definitely a character that you're going to enjoy. Sean is also someone who is, despite being someone who can evolve on his own without programming, someone who is absolutely perfect for Lloyd and respects Lloyd's boundaries and what his OCD needs done, which I think does a really great job of proving that just because you have OCD does not mean that you have to be with a robot who can specifically adhere to your guidelines. And Sean is also a rather horny guy. I'm gonna be honest, he is all over Lloyd. He loves Lloyd so much, and he's like, I just want to make Lloyd happy, and Lloyd is like, I just want to make you happy. So this is a smutty book as well, and Sean, being an android, has some interesting parts that add to their sexual experience with each other, which was fun to read about. So I would think if you're looking for a sweet, fun, sexy, quick read, then this is definitely a book worth checking out. The last book I want to recommend is a comic series that you can actually read online for free, and I will try and find the link for it again because I haven't read it for a few months, but it is by Hamlet Machine and it is called Starfighter, and I believe there are 5 volumes for this, and this is essentially a comic about space fighters. They are out far in space fighting these aliens that keep trying to get into their territory. And in these ships, there are 2 different people. There are the fighters and there are the navigators. And outside of the spaceship, they are usually somewhat segregated because the personalities of these characters are very different. The navigators are incredibly intelligent. They are a bit more proper nerdy kind of people, and then the fighters on the other hand are a bit more brutal. Maybe they're people that have been taken from like prison, and obviously they're down to kill, things like that, if not eager and a little bit bloodthirsty. However, our fighter and our navigator are thrown into the same room, and our fighter very quickly tries to take control of this navigator through sex. And our navigator is actually 100% on board with this. He is someone who left his wealthy family behind and is looking to form a strong physical connection with someone because he's never been able to do that back on his home planet. However, it starts to come to light that maybe the fighter is trying to be so close to our navigator for reasons that lead our navigator to believe there is corruption within the fighting force, and eventually the fighter comes to care enough about the navigator to join him to kind of look into this situation and bring change about. So I thought this was a very interesting comic. I really enjoyed the art of it. I enjoyed the character development. I enjoyed the plot that was happening. It is definitely a fast-paced story. You could probably sit down and read all 5 comics within like an hour or 2. That is essentially what I did. It does have some explicit scenes in it, so you know, you should be 18 and over to read it, I guess. Overall, I just thought this was a really fast-paced, sexy, and intense story to spend a couple of hours with. So definitely worth checking out. And like I said, I will try to make sure I put that link to it down below. All right, guys, so those are the 6 sci-fi romances that I recommend you check out. I would love to know if you have read any of these and what you thought of them. As always, thank you so much for supporting my channel by watching my video, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!